Well, it's wonderful to be back with you today and to be able to celebrate the Lord and just to worship Him in this place. I can't tell you how wonderful it is to be here, because when Rebecca and I left after the service on July 17th to head to Texas Children's Hospital in Houston for our youngest son Evan to prepare for surgery on July 22nd, Rebecca and I didn't know what we were about to experience. I didn't know if I would even be here today. I was prepared to contact a supply at the last minute if need to. I really thought what would probably happen is best case scenario was going to be me having to drive over here, preach, and then drive back to be with the family. But so I didn't know how to prepare for this Sunday. So before leaving, I pulled out some notes from an old sermon from a Sunday night in 2008. I figured that was safe because only about 50 people heard that sermon then, and about half of them have already beat us to heaven. So while it was an old sermon, it was not heard by many people. But the reason I selected that particular sermon was it was from a series I did on the names of God back in 2008, and I specifically selected the one called Jehovah Rophe, the God who heals, because I knew that I would need to be focused on that no matter what way we went. And the reason I picked an old sermon was because I've learned in all of our times in the hospital, you can't do substantial work in a hospital. There's just too much distraction, sleeping in the room, you're tired and weary, no telling what you've been hearing today if that would have been the case. But I knew I needed to reflect on God the healer, so I selected that message. Well, as most of you know by now, the surgery went perfect. Evan is doing amazing. He's not had a single seizure since the surgery. And we give praise to the Lord for that. And for those of you who don't know, that's a big thing because he had them all day long, every day. Just little drops and twitches and things. He's had nothing like that. Pray for us as we continue. Rebecca and I decided it was best for them to be at home today, give him a little more time to recover and get stronger. He's got a journey ahead of him, but he's doing just amazingly well. And we cannot say enough how grateful we are for the prayers that really started here and went out all over, I guess, the world even. Those prayers lifted us up. They carried us along. It was amazing. Your cards, your gifts. I mean, the week before we left was like Christmas every day. Something came in the mail that we needed. And then that Sunday, you gave us an amazing love offering, and that allowed the trip to cost nothing. And something you didn't know about was we had developed a pretty good bit of some debt. We've never had credit card debt in our whole life marriage, but we've had it for the last few months because of Evan's hospitalization earlier this year. That love offering helped us pay all of that off, and so that was another burden that was lifted. So thank you so much for just your generosity, and we can't say enough of how many burdens have been lifted. So 2 weeks ago, I thought I was going to be preaching today both weary and worried, and instead I'm preaching full of praise and anxious, not about a surgery or Evan's recovery, but anxious to share with you an updated and fresh word on the God who heals, because I have still reflected upon this, and I'm approaching it with just a great deal of joy and pleasure in the Lord today. So I don't know what you might be needing from God today. Maybe you need healing. Maybe someone in your family needs healing. Maybe you just need to be able to trust God for something in your life. Maybe it's financial provision. Maybe you just need the grace to get through whatever it is that you're going through. And whatever that is, it's my goal today that you leave here this morning full of faith and holding on to hope that the God who heals, Jehovah Rophe, will do a work in your life. And so I invite you to turn in your copy of God's Word to Exodus chapter 15, verses 22 through 27. If you haven't done that already, as we turn into the book of Exodus, you know that story where the whole book is about God taking the people out of slavery in Egypt and leading them towards the promised land. And as we open our Bibles to Exodus chapter 15, the Israelites are in a time of victory, because finally, after a long time of struggle, Pharaoh finally released the Hebrews from slavery in Egypt. Moses has led them out, and they're on their way to the promised land. But if you remember the story, not long had they been gone when Pharaoh decided, hey, I've made a bad decision. I need those people back. And so he and his army went after them to bring them back. And soon, The Hebrews found themselves not between a rock and a hard place, but between water and a hard place. They came up to the edge of the Red Sea. The Red Sea was ahead of them. Pharaoh's army was behind them. What were they to do? Were they to go back into slavery? Were they to jump in and start swimming to try to get away? What are they going to do? Of course, you know the story. God, through a powerful miracle, parted the Red Sea and allowed the Israelites to cross on dry land. Now, we've heard that story, those of us who've grown up in church, since we were 1 and 2 years old. So don't let it be like some fairy tale in your mind. This really happened. It was an amazing work of God on behalf of the people of Israel to set them free, to show them His power. And so they cross over on dry land. And what happened next was simply amazing. Pharaoh was just enough behind them with his army that as the time when the Israelites get out, Pharaoh and his armies are in the middle of the Red Sea. And you remember what happened? Exodus 15 tells us this: when Pharaoh's horses, chariots, and horsemen went into the sea, the Lord brought the waters of the sea back over them. But the Israelites walked through the sea on dry ground. And then Miriam, the prophetess, Aaron's sister, took a tambourine in her hand, and all the women followed her with tambourines and dancing. And Miriam sang to them, "Sing to the Lord, for He is highly exalted. The horse and its rider He is hurled into the sea. Strike up the band, get the choir together, bring out the tambourines. We're going to have a worship celebration." The people were excited about what was happening because they were safe, they were free. Isn't God good? Sing to Him praise. Brother Moses, come preach us a sermon. Sister Miriam, come lead us in a song. And as we follow the story, we discover, though, that the victorious celebration is soon replaced by frustrations and bitterness. The Israelites go from Pentecostal camp meeting to Baptist bad business meeting. And it's at this critical moment that the journey, in the journey, that God reveals another facet of His character, and He unveils this wonderful name, Jehovah Rophe. We pick up the story in Exodus 15, verses 22 to 24. Then Moses led Israel from the Red Sea, and they went into the desert of Shur. For 3 days they traveled in the desert without finding water. And when they came to Marah, they could not drink its water because it was bitter. That is why the place is called Marah. So the people grumbled against Moses, saying, "What are we to drink?" Now, obviously, the people of the Israelites couldn't just sit there on the banks of the Red Sea and set up camp and make that their new place. That was not the promised land. That's not where they were supposed to stay. They had to get going. And so immediately after that miraculous deliverance, Moses gathers the people together. They head off towards the promised land, but they have to cross the desert. And that desert is vast, it's rugged, it's sparsely populated, but presumably the Israelites were traveling upon a caravan route that offered reasonable passage on foot for caravanners who had brought with them ample water to make the trek, and then there were other oases and things that they could stop at to get across the way. Well, what happened was, after 3 days of traveling, as we read, plenty of time had passed for those people to have exhausted their supply of water. If you've ever been in an arid climate, you know how much water you can drink. And you won't sweat like you do here, but you're just drinking water like crazy, and you don't realize how much you're doing. And these people were in the desert, and they're dependent on their canteens and whatever they had packed with them. So it didn't take long for their water to run out. And when your water runs out, you get really worried. So in just 3 days, the people descend from this height of praise to this depth of despair. And then someone spotted an oasis ahead. There must be water there. And can you imagine these hundreds of thousands of people running towards this source of water? And those who arrived first, they get there, they fall on their knees, they put their heads probably all the way down in the water. They just swallow as much as they can. And just when they're about to say, instead they go, ugh. The water was bitter and it's terrible. And they turn to the people behind them and they say, "Don't drink the water. It's terrible." And they say, "Whatever, man. we're going to get it. Stop hoarding it for yourself. They push them aside, and they too go in and they go, oh, this is terrible. The waters were bitter, just when they really needed good water. And in that moment, the people of God went from praising to complaining. What has God done? Has He brought us out in here to die? We have no water. We've only been traveling for 3 days and we're already dead. Look, it's so dry I can't even spit. And they just gripe. And don't you know, they started saying, you know, back in the brickyard of Egypt, we had plenty of water. Oh, we'd work hard and sweat all day, but boy, we had that good water. Wasn't it good back in Egypt? But here we are in this desert, and we're going to die. Now remember, it had only been 3 days since that great day. It had only been 3 days since everyone had been high-fiving and praising the Lord and having their camp meeting and shouting. It had only been 3 days. Now they've descended into that bad business meeting. And what's interesting is God had already exhibited His power to lead the people. I mean, when they were in between water and the hard place, God had parted that Red Sea just 3 days before. But even before that, they'd gone through all of that time of those plagues coming on the nation of Egypt, but never on the people of Israel. And they saw God's hand work in amazing power. There was no explaining it except for the hand of God. So we would say, how in the world could these Israelites ever doubt God after witnessing such amazing miracles? Perhaps we should ask ourselves how we do that. Because we do it as well, don't we? I mean, we can be just a few days past a wondrous work of God in our lives. He could have blessed us in any number of ways, and then a few days later, or sometimes the very next day, we grumble and we complain, oh, God doesn't care. Where is He? I don't know where He is at this time. How do we let ourselves do that? I think we do it the same way the Israelites did it. We do a couple of things. One is we continually look for the next big thing. We want our life to be one constant, God-blessed, heaven-sent, Holy Ghost revival. We want to live on the mountaintop all the time. But life is not just a plateau of a mountaintop. There are valleys, and in the valleys we often grow more and we celebrate in the mountaintops. But we don't want the valleys. We want the big stuff of God every day. We want the big healing, the big financial blessing. We want the big, warm, fuzzy, and when God doesn't give it, we look around us saying, what's wrong? I'm still loving the Lord. I'm still doing what I'm supposed to be doing. Where's God in all of this? And if we don't get the next big thing, we complain and we grumble. And then, second, since we can't look for the next big thing, we focus on the past. Oh, weren't things glorious back then? Oh, weren't we blessed? But if you focus on the past, it won't be long before complaints start oozing from your lips, because you'll remember a long time ago, but you'll remember it in kind of a hazy, rosy glow of memory where there were no problems and everything was just wonderful. And as you compare then what you want to remember from then and now, then you start to grumble. You look back with nostalgia and you say, oh, those were the days. But you know something? Those days weren't near as perfect as you remember them. We tend to erase the challenges when we lose them in nostalgia. Listen to what Chuck Swindoll says about this nostalgic looking to the past, and I quote, "It's foolish. We look back nostalgically on what was once a pleasant situation, at which time, even then, we were looking back longingly on a more pleasant earlier time. That's dumb, isn't it?" I like that Chuck Swindoll says that's dumb. It makes me feel good that I can say that from the pulpit. He says, you may be grumbling right now about your current situation, but chances are good that 2 years from now, you'll be looking back on this moment and saying, oh, for the good old days. Boy, it was great back then, wasn't it? We live in light of some dreamy past leisure or pleasure, when in actuality, God continues to show Himself strong all along the way. You know, neither continually looking back with this addictive anticipation for the next thing or always looking back for nostalgia of the good old days will allow you to get very far with God, because with God, you follow Him. You don't look for the next big thing. You look for Him because He is the big thing of every day, no matter what's going on. Just wait. He'll do something that will amaze you. But you know what He's going to do in the meantime? He's going to do a whole lot of little stuff that you're not even going to notice. But He is going to be working. Notice something else. The Israelites had been on this spiritual high. Now they face this spiritual defeat. And think about that. Does it surprise you that this great spiritual victory is followed by a time of defeat and discouragement and disillusionment and depression? It doesn't me. Satan often intensifies his spiritual attack on the heels of a great victory. It happened to the prophets. It's happening here to these Hebrews. The reality was the Israelites were out of water, yes. But the reality also was, if you read on, that they were just a few miles from a place called Elim, where God was going to lead them to more water than they could possibly drink or carry. Another couple of hours, and they would have all the good water they would need. But Satan attacked just a few miles from God's provision. So Satan took their vision off of the God of provision and put it on themselves and their need. And that caused the people to grumble. And Satan loves to do that. And why do when they grumble, who do they go to? They go to their leader, Moses. And who does Moses go to? Thankfully, he knows to go to God. Considering that God had just taken them through the Red Sea, He parted a whole bunch of water, surely God could provide what they needed of a little bit of water in this moment. And so he cries out to God. Look at verses 25 and following. Then Moses cried out to the Lord, and the Lord showed him a piece of wood, and he threw it into the water, and the water became sweet. There the Lord made a decree and a law from them, and there He tested them. He said, if you listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God and do what is right in His eyes, if you pay attention to His commands and keep all His decrees, I will not bring on you any of the diseases I brought on the Egyptians, for I am the Lord who heals you. I am Jehovah Rophe. Now notice that it was at this point, at this time of grumbling and complaining, at this time when the enemy was trying to take the glory away from God and cause the people to turn from Him, that God chose to reveal Himself to them as Jehovah Rophe, the God who heals. This word Rophe, or sometimes pronounced Rapha, appears 60 times in the Old Testament. It always means to restore, to heal, to cure. It's often used in relation to physical healing, but it can also be used to relate to moral healing or spiritual healing. God reveals Himself to be the only source of wholeness. He alone has the power to change the bitter experiences of life into sweet. Our need for healing is more apparent than ever in society. You know, every time we go to Houston, I'm amazed at that medical city area. We spend most of our times in those 4 buildings in the forefront. That's Texas Children's, just where that little half-circle connection thing is. And they're huge. They're massive. But all of that city right there, and some that's not on the screen, is made up of hospitals and schools. I looked up just how big Texas Medical Center is. It covers 675 acres. That's a little over a square mile. It's home to 42 nonprofit and government institutions, including 13 teaching hospitals, 2 medical schools, 4 colleges of nursing, a dental college, a college of pharmacy, a college of optometry. 4.8 million patients visit there each year. That's where MD Anderson is. That's where Texas Children's is. This is where all these people are. It's the one place where UT and Texas A&M can work together on things because they both have stuff there. It's amazing. We have such a need for physical healing because that's in just one of our major cities. And many of us have gone there for various things or had family members who've gone there. But we also need healing beyond the physical, the need for healing of emotions or relationships or even our spiritual condition. There are many marriages that are sick or minds that are sick, and many people are sick with sin and in need of salvation. We have a tremendous need of healing. And Jehovah Jireh, our provider, who knows us, then reveals himself as something we desperately need, and that is Jehovah Rophe, the God who heals. But here's what strikes me. God didn't reveal himself as healer back when the Israelites were still in Egypt and doing fine. Like when the Egyptians were getting boils and mess all over them and the Hebrews were fine, God didn't say, hey guys, look how the Egyptians are like looking terrible and all sick and stuff and you're doing fine. That's because I am the God, your healer. Worship me. God didn't choose to do this at that point in time. Instead, he chose to wait until the bitter waters at Marah, after a mountaintop experience, at a spiritually low point. Now, why did he do that? I think he chose to reveal himself at this spiritually low point in bitterness and wondering where God is and wondering how we're going to get through, because he knew that's where we often are when we need to remember that he is Jehovah Rophe, our healer. When we meet with the doctor and we don't get the all-clear diagnosis that we hoped for, or when we hear the word cancer, or we don't like what's being done, or the surgery doesn't go like we had hoped it would, God knew that in those times, it's in those times that we would cry out, why me? And that we would cry out and we might grow bitter. But it's at those times that we need to hear him as the healer, speaking to us and singing over us that he is the God who heals us. I am the God who healeth thee. I am the Lord, your healer. I sent my word and healed your disease. I am the Lord, your healer. We need to hear the Lord say that over us, because we then need to be able to respond back to him that we believe that he is our healer. We need to be able to say to him, you hold my every moment. You calm my raging seas. You walk with me through fire and heal all my disease. I trust in you. I trust in you. I believe you're my healer. I believe you are all I need. I believe you're my portion. I believe you're more than enough for me. Jesus, you're all I need. So we hear him say that to us and we respond that we believe that he is the healer. But how do we get from the bitterness of Marah to believing God for the healing? Or trusting God to give us the grace to handle the situation no matter what, even if he chooses not to heal in this life? How do we go from the bitterness to the trusting? It's by not focusing on the disease or the bitterness, but by focusing on God. You see, he gives the truth in verse 26. He walks them right through it. If you see, he says, if you listen carefully to the voice of the Lord your God, you do what's right in His eyes, you pay attention to His commands, you keep all His decrees, then he says He will not bring on you what He brought on the Egyptians. Now that's the exact opposite of how the Egyptians lived their lives. That's the exact opposite how anybody who's opposed to God lives their lives. But those who follow the Lord listen to His voice. They obey His word because they believe the Lord and they trust in Him. So this is a good way to live, especially when you come to some bitter waters in your life and you don't know where to go. Listen to God's voice. Keep doing what's right in His eyes. Pay attention to His commands and keep His decrees. And some live righteously. And the God who heals will heal. Now the story wraps up rather quickly in verse 27, but notice what it says. Then they came to Elim, where there were 12 springs and 70 palm trees. And they camped there near the water. You see, God was just about to give them everything they need. So a couple of focus points to glean and take home today. First, you must walk with God in order to be healed by God. In much the same way that you submit to your human doctor's expertise and his or her hands to be healed, you've got to submit to the Lord as your great physician. You release control and you say, Lord, I'll take whatever prescription you give me to take. Lord, I will make whatever change in my life that you tell me I need to make. You can do whatever surgery on me that I need to do. Because as verse 26 says, you've got to listen to His voice. You've got to do what He says. You've got to pay attention to His commands. You've got to keep all His decrees. And that takes a lot of faith, doesn't it? It takes a lot of faith to trust God and release, but it takes a lot of faith to trust a human physician. We just trusted a human physician to drill into our son's head and burn the fibers between the two hemispheres of his brain. If I can have faith to trust a man to do that to my kid, surely I can have faith in the God who created everything that is. So, surrender to God, walk with Him, see what He will do. Even if He chooses not to heal you physically in this life, the grace that He pours into you and around you and through you during that can be a source of hope to everyone else who watches your life. I thought about it when we were at LeCount today because so many people have mentioned this to me. We prayed for my dad to be healed. A lot of people prayed for my dad to be healed of his cancer. And I've never prayed as much for something except Evan as I did my dad to be healed. But God chose not to heal my dad, and he passed away at 75 from cancer. But here's what God did through all of that time. Every Sunday that Daddy could, which was up until he could no longer walk anymore, he was at church. 5th row, middle section. They'd come in. The people at LeCount say sometimes your daddy couldn't even stand, but he'd pull himself up to sing or to pray or to whatever. He was there and he was strong and he's pushing through. And that was a testimony. So even though God chose not to heal him in this life, God did something through his life that still today, 15 years later, people are still talking about. And it's a reminder to them when they got the sniffles, maybe they need to suck it up and get to church. You know, walk with God. Trust Him. You've got to walk with God to be healed by God. But second, here's the good one. Never give up too soon. If there's anything this story tells us, I mean, the Israelites gave up 5 miles before the provision. God still came through, and He used their stubbornness, thankfully, to give us a timeless lesson. But my goodness, they were going to be okay if they'd have just followed Him a little longer. Because God was taking them to the place of refreshing, but they gave up too soon and they grumbled. Never give up too soon. Keep on believing, keep on praising, keep on pressing on. I've hung on to something Dr. John Clement told me years ago. He said, It's never wrong to keep on praying for healing until you know to pray for something else. Pray to the last minute, seeking the Lord to give you that. No mountain, no valley, no gain or loss we know could keep us from your love. No sickness, no secret, no chain is strong enough to keep us from your love, to keep us from your love. How high, how wide, no matter where I am, healing is in His hands. How deep, how strong, now by your grace I stand. Healing is in your hands. Aren't you grateful that healing is in His hands? So as I started this message, I said, I don't know what you've brought to church today. There could be a huge burden. There could be a need for healing. There could be a need for answers. There could be just a worry, a concern for you or someone else. All I can tell you is as someone who's recently experienced the faithfulness of God, just trust Him. It may not come out exactly like you want it to come out, but I can guarantee you this: God will see you out, and God will see you through, and He's never going to leave you.